Since I started posting videos a couple months ago, all of my videos have been documenting my build of the 347 here and the run stand. And those have been very popular, and thank you for everybody that's been watching them. I really appreciate it. I figured it's about time that I start introducing you to some of my other projects, though. I mentioned in my introductory video, if you watched it, that I've got a lot of stuff going on other than the engine. The engine is going in my 78 Mustang here that's next to me. So I've got a lot of projects going on this car, doing a lot of cool things with my motorcycle. It's a 2012 Honda ST1300. And so I figured it was about time I started to post some videos with some other content. And I'm going to start with my car. Been working on the car for, I don't know, about a year and a half now. And lots of things going on. It's challenging to work on a car like a 78 Mustang II because they weren't very popular in the aftermarket. I won't say they weren't popular, period, because it's one of the best-selling Mustangs ever. In 73, Ford struggled to sell like 300,000 Mustangs. In 74, they sold like 1.2 million. This body style was extremely popular when it first came out. A lot of people say it saved the Mustang, or even that it saved Ford and got Ford through the gas crisis in the 70s. Be that as it may, it wasn't embraced by the aftermarket. So if you want to restore or customize a car like this, one of the challenges you're going to face is that every single Mustang catalog you ever pick up, or every website that you go to that sells Mustang parts, when you look up in their catalog the parts and the different model years they sell, every single one of them will say 64.5 to 73 Mustang and then 79 on up. There's only maybe one website on the whole internet that serves this car and serves it somewhat well. That's Custom Auto Reproductions. Got a lot of parts from them, especially hard to find things like door seals and window seals and miscellaneous trim pieces. But a lot of this stuff, there's simply no aftermarket support for it. If you want it, you're going to have to build it. So for instance, if I had a 65, 66, 67 Mustang, and I wanted to upgrade from the factory dash panel, there are any number of different companies that I could go to get a direct replacement dash that would come with aftermarket gauges that do everything from work exactly or look exactly like the original gauges but have modern internals to them, to full-on digital dashes. And they're all pre-built, pre-assembled. All you do is put it in place and drive off. You don't have that option when you're working with a car like my 78 Mustang. If you want some things, you just have to make them yourself. And so I wanted the reason I mentioned a dash is because I wanted a cooler dash than what was in the car. I wanted more gauges and I wanted them to look cool. I wanted it to have a racy look. I had a 77 Mustang in the past and I had made a custom dash for that car. And so I wanted to make one for this car as well. In this video, I'm going to attach, after this intro, just a series of short videos that I shot as I was going through the steps of taking my factory dash and converting it into a custom dash with custom gauges. And I hope you enjoy it. This is the dash out of my Mustang. I've got it laid out on the trunk of the car here. And I'm working on my plan to update the dash itself and replace these gauges. It's a little sporty for its time. In the late 70s, it was pretty common to have individual gauges like this laid out. Got the tach and speedo, fuel, alternator, and the temperature gauge over there. This is a factory AC car, so I've got AC vents there, the headlight switch is here, and then a cluster of warning lights up here. I could live without the faux wood dash. What I did on my last Mustang, it was a 78, same configuration except that car didn't have factory AC, so that vent wasn't there. And so what I did on that car was I put a speedometer dead center, I put a fuel gauge over here, and then I had 3 rows of 2 gauges at an angle here, and then the tack was up on top of the dash. So I had 9 total gauges. I don't want to put the tack on the dash in this car, and so I'm going to inset it into the dash. So what I'm considering is tack and speedo, fuel, and then either 3 gauges like this or add a 4th one up there. And the idiot lights are going to go, of course, and I'll just work around the 2 vent openings. The deciding factor is going to be real estate. For the individual gauges in my 77, I used 2 5/8 inch gauges rather than the smaller 2 1/16. Those are the 2 sort of standard sizes for aftermarket gauges. And the larger ones are really nice, quite frankly. For the speedo in that car, I had a 3 3/8 speedo and then a 5-inch tack on the dash. But I think what I'm going to try and do, or figure out if I can do, is go with a 5-inch tack and 5-inch speedo in the center, and then 2 5/8 gauges for the others, and how that'll lay out. So I will still have the turn signal indicators. I'll put a high beam indicator in the front. I'm spoiled by modern cars that give you the little green light when the headlights are turned on, so I'll put one of those there. And then for my oil pressure and my water temperature, I'll have idiot lights for those, warning lights for those in the dash. And so that's going to be the general layout. Now, when I did my 77, this whole front face comes off. And what I did on my 77 was I cut that bottom flange off and I cut that top flange off. And I made a sheet metal panel, and then I attached the bottom and the top edges to that sheet metal panel. And that turned out in the end to be way more complicated than it needed to be. What I could have done, and what I'm going to do on this car, is to simply grind down all these ridges around all of the existing gauge openings and the warning lights, so it'll be a flat panel. And then I'm just going to cut out a sheet metal overlay out of aluminum to go over the top of this. And then I'll cut my new gauge openings in that overlay. Underneath, there's plenty of real estate to work with. Let me put this down here. So the actual gauge cluster itself is a single removable piece, and of course this gives me the guidelines of where the 2 AC vents will be. Over here, this is where the headlight switch mounts, and this steel structure is a bit overkill. I could cut it off here and there, remove this whole section of it, and then I've got a large opening that I could sink my fuel pressure or fuel level gauge into. But removing the factory cluster, it's just a giant hole, and so I can basically build whatever I want to and set it in there. So the only question will be what size gauges I can actually fit in here, and I've got a way to do that. I built some templates, or not built, but I printed out some templates in the actual sizes of the gauges that I'm interested in, and so I'm going to show you what that looks like. Stand by. Okay, so I'm back with my templates in place on the actual dash. So I had decided quite a while ago that I was going to go with Autometer Sport Comp gauges. I've been using Autometer since the 90s. With great success. I like their gauges, I like the way they look, they're extremely reliable, so I wanted to stick with them, and the Sport Comp is my favorite design from them. So I went on their website and downloaded images of their indicators, and then I printed them out in actual size. So the tack and the speedo there are a little more than 5 inches in diameter, because on their website they give you the size of the hole. So 5 inches for those is the hole size, 2 5/8 for the smaller gauges is also the hole size. You've got to add about 3/8 of an inch to either gauge to get the outer diameter of the gauge face itself. So these are printed true to size. And so I printed the smaller ones and laid those out, and then I printed the larger ones and laid those out. And this is essentially what I'm going to go with. The ones over here might get a little bit of shuffling, and this one here I'm not sure if I want to center it or what, but it's going to go over here. So I've got the speedo and tack fuel level. I've got oil pressure here, water temperature and oil temperature side by side, and there's a voltmeter. And so that's what I'm going to go with. And then the light switch will stay here. The red indicator will go here. Turn signals, high beam light, and then the oil pressure and water temperature warning lights will go on the edge of those gauges somewhere. Now I went with, I decided to go with electrical gauges for all of these. I've gone with mechanical gauges in the past almost exclusively, just mostly stubbornness, right? Real hot rods have mechanical gauges. Mechanical gauges are typically less expensive, but they're a little more difficult to work with. So for instance, if I needed to pull the dash to work on anything, if I had a mechanical oil pressure gauge and a mechanical temperature gauge, like I did in my other Mustang, my 77, I had mechanical oil temp and water temp. So you got the big rigid board-on tube with those, and then the oil pressure tube. I had a copper one with that, and so it makes it very difficult even just to move the dash, let alone take it out. Whereas with the electrical gauges, I'll be able to just disconnect electrical connectors and pull it out and do whatever I need to behind the dash, if I need to do anything behind the dash. At least I'll have the option this time. So I went with the electric gauges. The cool thing about it, especially with the speedometer, is that in this car I'm installing a Tremec TKX transmission. It's a brand new model. Tremec just introduced it about a year ago, maybe. Anyway, it uses the Ford vehicle speed sensor that you'll find on anything starting with the T5 and later. And so this speedo will take the VSS input. It's got a little calibration mode you put it in once it's in the car and you're up and running. You go find a measured 2-mile stretch. You can use the roadside markers, and you just you start at 1, or you stop the car right at the beginning of the measured 2-mile stretch of road. You put it in calibration mode, and then you drive 2 miles, and you stop at the second marker, take it out of calibration mode, and that's it. It needs to know, it measures the rotation of the shaft inside the transmission, and if you tell it that's 2 miles, it'll do the math and it'll calculate, or it'll calibrate the speedometer so that it'll give you the correct speed. The rest of them are just plug-and-play sensors. So this is how it's going to look. I'm going to get to work on building the overlay panel to cover the wood grain. I'll cut out the AC vents, they'll stay where they are. Everything else is just going to be flat on that panel, and I'll cut out all the holes where they go. Have to do a little massaging on that understructure where the fuel pressure or fuel quantity gauge is going to go. But that's how it's going to look. So I'll stop this here, and I'll pick it up as I'm going through the steps of building this dash. So in order to prepare the dash for the installation of the new gauges, first I want to convert this into a flat panel surface. I'm not going to use the existing openings. I want to make my own openings, but I want to use this piece as a support. So the first thing that I did was I ground off the bezels that were around all of the gauge openings, turn signals, warning lights, and so forth, and then sand this so that it's flat. Definitely not pretty, but it is flat. And then made myself a paper template that fits on the surface nicely. And then I transferred that template over to a piece of sheet aluminum that fits on there nicely on the surface. I'm going to bond that piece of aluminum to the surface. I'll clean up the back side and apply some corrosion protection. This is aviation aluminum, it's clad, so I'm not too worried about corrosion, but I will restore the allodyne on the back side because I have scratched it up a little bit, especially around the openings that I cut and on the edges where I cut it out. So I'll apply some corrosion preventative materials and prime it on the backside before I bond it onto the plastic support. And then once that's together, then I can go ahead and start cutting out my individual gauge holes. Alright, so now I've got all of the holes cut out of the dash. So I've got my speedo and tack, and I was off on the hole size here. So they're 5-inch gauges, at least they advertise in that way. And usually with Autometer, the size of the indicator is the hole size. Like for a 2 5/8 inch gauge, you cut a 2 5/8 inch hole, and that's what the gauge goes in. But their 5-inch gauges are actually a little smaller in diameter than 5 inches, and the hole size is just a little bit bigger than 4.5 inches. So I had to use a 4.5 inch hole saw and then open them up with a sander a little bit. But the other gauges are 2 5/8. Of course, I already had the air conditioner openings cut out before. My headlight switch will go here. And what I've got here are my left and right turn signals. In the center, the lower switch is the green light that will come on as a headlight, a low beam indicator, and then the one above that is the high beam indicator. And then these two lights right here, these are 2 warning lights. One will be oil pressure low, and the other will be water temperature high. So I've test fit everything, all the gauges fit in nicely. And so the next step is going to be I had this attached to the plastic frame with double-sided tape just to hold it in place when I was drilling the holes. So I'm going to separate the two, and then I'll make some plastic repairs to the plastic part. I'll paint that with the flexible plastic or vinyl spray paint, and I'll do a little body work on the aluminum panel itself. There are a few scratches and gouges where I slipped with the tooling, so I'll smooth those out and probably fill them in with a little body filler before I paint the panel black. And then I'll bond the two together so that I can install the gauges. So this is the semi-finished product. So I touched up all the holes a little bit and made some repairs to the plastic. Then I painted the plastic with a flexible vinyl plastic paint, and then for the aluminum treated it with allodyne, then some primer and some paint, along with some putty to touch up some spots where I made tooling marks. And then I bonded the two together with a structural adhesive. So this is what's left of the original plastic part on the back side, and then the aluminum is actually bonded to it on the front side. I use an adhesive that I use in aviation regularly. It's designed to bond plastics to aluminum specifically, so works really well. I did have some squeeze out of the epoxy when I bonded it, so I did have to touch up those holes again with a sander to make sure that the gauges would fit in nicely, but everything fits really well. So the next step will be to put the gauges in and then start working on the wiring. Okay, so it took a little bit of work to get here, but this is the dash essentially ready to go in the car. So I've got my fuel gauge here, speedo and tach. I've got water temperature, oil temperature, voltmeter, and then oil pressure up here. So I've got my left and right turn signals. I've got a low beam and a high beam indicator. I've got low oil pressure warning light and a high water temperature oil light. The AC vents are in the stock location, so is the headlight switch opening. And so it's all mounted again to the panel that was a cover panel for the factory dash. So this is just going to pop right into its place. As for wiring, I used Autometer gauges, so I went ahead and purchased Autometer's wire harness. So they give you a wire harness with a gauge side connector and then a harness for the car side, so you can disconnect essentially a single connector to pull the whole dash out. They pre-wire it for 6 gauges. So the speedo, tach, fuel, oil pressure, water temp, and voltmeter are already pre-wired into this harness. So anything I have to do is wire up the oil temperature indicator and then connect all of the light wiring to this, and then I'll probably make a multi-connector for the warning lights, so they'll be able to connect. So I'll be able to undo the fasteners for the factory dash, disconnect a couple electrical connectors, and pull the whole thing out if I need to, either to work on it or to work on something else up at the dash that getting this out of the way will make it easier to work on. So it's not the prettiest thing in the world. It probably looks okay on the camera. In person, there's plenty of imperfections. Like this dash, it's made in '78 and it's plastic. So, I fixed the cracks that were structural problems, but there's scratches and dings and that sort of thing. I mean, this isn't a show car. It's my toy. I just wanted it to look cooler than it did originally, and I think I've achieved that goal. So I'm not going to go any further into it in this video. When I start doing videos on the wiring for the car, then I'll probably cover a lot more on the dash wiring as a whole, not just the indicators, but all of the other wiring up of the under the dash as well. So we'll just leave this here for now and move on to other things.